Tip for the day: keep 1 foot in the dark ages. Keep 1 foot in the dark ages. So what exactly do I mean by that, and why would I say that? Older guys know what life was like before all of this insanity going on in our society. Older guys know what life was like. You know, when I set out to make this video, first I figured I'm going to gather enough information so that I can put it out there to kind of like set the stage so that you understand and take this with the sincerity in which it's intended. So I figured I'll go gather just in the past week to 10 days how many senseless, needless, ridiculous, and unbelievable, just seemingly random, and to some extent it is random, violent crimes have befallen citizens of our great land just in the past week to 10 days. So I started to look, and it surprised even me. Found all kind of craziness, some really prime examples for what I'm trying to say here, or why I'm trying to say it. I saw an 80-year-old Vietnam veteran punched in the eye, unprovoked by him, punched in the eye with so much force and so hard, and him being 80 years old and just having experienced and being subjected to the ravages of time, he lost his eye. Lost his eye. So he was in the hospital, lost his eye. They thought he was going to, maybe he should be okay. Sent him home. Had complications, infection, whatever. Returned to the hospital 3 days later. Ceased to be. 3 days later, wife and family had to make funeral arrangements. Yeah, so this is a guy that made it through Nam. And I'll also point this out. When I saw the news article, they showed a picture of him as he appeared today, prior to prior to that assault upon him having taken place, as an 80-year-old guy, next to a picture of him as a young strapping man in Vietnam. And it's the same old story. These predators, these cowardly predators, they are opportunists. They're not going to come out there and attack the strongest ones in the herd, or even those that appear to be the healthiest and the strongest in the herd. They're going to single out and they're going to look for weakness, and they're going to try to exploit that. They're predators. They're vicious animals. So, you know, looking at that picture of that fellow when he was a young man in Nam, they would have never selected him. They would have never accosted him. And of course, in that time, back then, these things were not commonplace like today. Now, you can argue that they were, but I was there, and they were not. They were not. And before you, oh, you weren't there in Vietnam? Yes, I didn't go to Vietnam. I was too young, but I grew up in that time period. I was born, how old would I have been? By 74, you know, I was like 10 years old. 12 years old, I was actually older. 12 or 13 years old by 74. So I grew up and I saw that, you know. I saw how men behaved and how men conducted themselves. And you always had bad men, but not like today. Not to the extent that you have today. Nothing like today. The irreprehensible, completely senseless things that happen today in our society on the regular, daily, it wasn't that way. And I know it's really popular for people to say, well, we didn't have this network of communication that we have now, so you didn't hear about everything all over the entire country, or let alone the world. And so these things were happening and you just weren't aware of them. No, they weren't happening. They weren't happening. I grew up and walked the streets, played, lived, worked. They weren't happening. It wasn't like this today. New York City, of course, you know, they have Early this month, they deployed 750 National Guard, fully armed National Guard initially, into the subway systems there because it's out of control, the level of violence and criminality. They can't control it. And so they conceded and said, we got to bring in the National Guard. We just can't handle it. It's too much. It's too many. We're spread too thin. So they have in totality over 1,000 law enforcement officers in those subways. But we still have shootings. We still have people pushing people onto tracks. And these things are just happening in the past 7 to 10 days. They're happening all the time. It's commonplace. That's why they were down there in the first place. There was shooting on a subway. Can you imagine that? On your way to work, mass transit, or on your way home. And then you got to just survive the trip home, you know? Gunfire, gunplay on the subway. They had cameras inside, so it's been recorded. You can go and find it yourself and see it. Everybody was climbing literally on top of each other, panicking, you know, chaos, trying to get off the subway, but they can't get off until the car stops. So consider that. Philadelphia, right here in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, it's become far too commonplace for there to be shootings on their mass transit buses, on the bus lines, on the bus system. You know, what about people that don't have a car, people that choose to utilize mass transit? You know, commonplace things. Elderly people, victimized, attacked, murdered, beaten. For what? For what? You might say, for what? For whatever little bit of money they had in their pocket? Well, it's already a horrible thing to think about, but the truth is sometimes it's for nothing. Sometimes it's for nothing. It's for shits and giggles to some of these people. It's not even about the little bit of money sometimes that they have in their pockets. Not that far from here, but in Maryland. In Maryland, certainly not here because we have not only the castle law but stand your ground law, and for $18 you can get a permit, provided that you legally can have a firearm. You can get a permit to carry concealed for 7 years. So we don't have home invasions and stuff here. That doesn't happen. Cities, like any city, whole different environment, different laws, different rules, whole different thing. And that's a whole other aspect to it when you think about it. Yeah, the cities are going to crack down and be tighter and have more regulations and more laws because you have so much gunplay in the cities, because you have so much violence, because you have so much crime. But who does that really affect? Does it disarm the criminals that are doing these things? It actually limits or denies the people that have to live there, you know, the good, honest, decent people that live there, from the choices that they would otherwise maybe have to keep and bear to try to protect themselves, to stay safe, literally just to stay alive in their own homes now, you know, or just going about their daily lives, just pursuing their happiness, which only nation in the world where you're guaranteed the right to pursue your happiness. Ironic. But like I was saying, right over in Maryland, within the past 7 to 10 days, there was a 22-year-old guy. He had an infatuation or crush, whatever you want to call it, for a 17-year-old girl. And so the 17-year-old girl, and this is in a decent neighborhood, nice home, you know, suburbs. 17-year-old girl is upstairs in a bedroom, doing whatever, middle of the day. She lives with the grandmother, 80-year-old grandmother, 70-some-year-old grandmother downstairs doing whatever it is a grandmother does in the middle of the day, watching TV, whatever she's doing, crocheting, knitting. And this 22-year-old guy comes over who, by the way, let me just put this out there, he's 6'4", 280 pounds. Comes over and raises all kind of ruckus and wants to see her. I guess they went on a date or whatever, and the girl didn't want anything to do with him or any more to do with him and broke it off, and he wasn't having it. Well, grandmother denied him entrance. She wouldn't let him in, go away. She doesn't want to see you. Broad daylight. So what does he do? Walk away dejectedly? No. Gets in the car, rides to the closest Home Depot, and he's on video, so they know what he bought, and they saw him in there. Buys a knife, a glass cutter, and a third object, which I'm unsure what that was. I'm wanting to say it was duct tape, but I'm not certain about that. But I am certain he did buy a knife. He did buy a glass cutter. And you'll find out why I'm certain about that in a minute. Returns to the house, goes around to the back, tries to employ the glass cutter to gain entry. As is often very typical, these later model males, not all, but too many. It's becoming too frequent and too normal, and too standard fare, okay? But not all. There are some good, decent, stand-up, old school, have a good upbringing, moral structure, decent, righteous young men out there. Thank God for that. This guy wasn't one of those. This guy was one of the at least half. He didn't have any skills. He couldn't even figure out how to use a glass cutter. So the glass cutter didn't do him any good. He couldn't get in. So he went around the front of the house and he beat on the door again. Finally, the grandmother, I guess she figures she's not accustomed to that. It never even enters her mind that something like what is about to happen could even happen here. She's never seen anything like this. She lived 70 some years, 80 years, and it's broad daylight, and it's a nice neighborhood. She gives the young man the benefit of the doubt, opens the door, tells him, "You're going to have to leave. You can't come in. She doesn't want to see you." Guy responds by taking that knife he just purchased at Home Depot, stabbing her with it. I believe it was either 25 or 29 times, so says the coroner's report. I kind of can't recall the exact number, but it was either 25 or 29. 25, 29, 30, 24, whatever. Kills her, leaves her laying in blood, steps over her, goes upstairs to the girl's room, kicks the door in, and rapes her. So then you would probably ask, well, what did he do then? Abscond out of state, go across the state lines, or head for the border, or hide out somewhere? No. Easy day. Guess he's tired now from all the interplay, so he went home and chilled out. Went back to his house and just chilled, kicked back. Of course, he was apprehended. They caught him. I saw a neighbor, bleeding heart neighbor, interviewed by the news, and she said, "Oh, he always seemed like such a nice young man. I can't believe he would do something like this. He must have just snapped. Something had to have made him do it." That's a big problem. Famous last words. I'm pretty certain that grandmother that opened the door, she didn't think he would do something like that either. Sometimes you're better to be safe than sorry. And newsflash for that bleeding heart that went out and had sympathy for this brutal animal that did this to this old woman and her granddaughter. He didn't just snap. And he was never a good guy. That didn't just happen because she didn't let him in. He had time to have his wits about him enough to drive to the Home Depot and buy what he needed, what he believed he needed to come back and utilize those which he could. Wasn't capable of operating a glass cutter apparently, but he could operate the knife. Anyway, rather than go on and on and on, and rather than post screenshots and stuff of some of this stuff, you can't convince the sheep. You can't wake sheep up, because sheep are just have blinders on, and they're just in a line, one behind the other, being led around, and a sheep has his head so far up the ass of the sheep in front of them that you won't wake a sheep up. So I figured there's no point in me putting up any more evidence that these things are happening. If you're a sheep and you disagree and you don't believe it, you think it's safe out there, you go on thinking that. So I'm not trying to wake up the sheep. Giving up on that. But maybe you can wake up other lions. So what I'm saying to you, older guys in particular, because come on, you know the difference. You've been around, you know what's going on. You see it. You know, if you have a daughter or a son or a granddaughter or a grandson or a wife or a mom, which if she's, God willing, still alive, or a dad or uncle or aunt or cousins or anybody that you're fond of or that you love or that you care about, don't leave it to chance. You know, if do what you can do. Do what you can do. And that is get off your ass and become viable again. So I think my last video kind of got that point across from the response to the emails that I got. So this video, I just want to remind you, if you can remember a time when, I don't know, no one pretty much dared to say anything about the American flag. And if somebody were to burn the flag, that could result in fisticuffs. And that would be totally understandable. Nobody would dare say you're less than intelligent or you're foolish or stupid because you believe in a spaghetti monster in the sky, because you believe in God. Who would have ever thought there'd be a time like this? If you remember these things, if you remember when men had skills, if you remember when men could change a tire, or if you remember when men could change their own oil, or maybe do some other work on their car, or men could fix a lawnmower, men would mow their own grass, you know, men were handy around the house, men could fix things, men could do things. If you grew up and you saw this and you remember that that's not a dream, that was the truth, that was real, that's what we were. Those are the kind of men we bred and created for the most part here. Where every man at one time carried a pocket knife. Hell, if you were in Cub Scouts or you were in Webelos or you were in Boy Scouts and you had a pocket knife with your little Cub Scout emblem or Webelo emblem or Boy Scout emblem right on it. A man should be able to start a fire. You know, a man should be able to provide. A man should be able to keep his family warm. Under whatever situation, if he needs to be. A man should be able to think on his feet and get it, make it happen. With just what's out there and what's available. A man should be able to defend and protect his family. A man should be able to feed his family. If it come to, you know, the nth degree, the most unthinkable situations, a man should be resourceful. If you remember any of those things, you know, that's why I'm going to say, keep a foot in the dark ages. You know, what I mean by that is keep those things alive in you. Maybe practice those things or sharpen those skills up again. You know, get the rust off of them, oil those tools, lubricate those tools. And when I say dark ages now, yeah, today everybody thinks they're a Viking or they're a knight or they're a, I don't know, cowboy or they're a, from all these TV shows, you know. How about you be something? You be the best you can be the most competent you can be. Be a man. How about that? Just be a man. So when I say dark ages, we're far beyond that, but compared to what men are expected to be today, the expectations of men and masculinity today, the standing which it occupies, the station, the place in which it fits in our society today, compared to that, yeah, keep a foot in the dark ages. Word to the wise is usually sufficient, and sometimes, the worst of you, depending on the situation, could turn out to be the best of you. Take care.